Airbnb just made a huge change that's going to affect a lot of hosts, including myself. And the change, if you haven't heard, is Airbnb is banning indoor cameras. And if you're a guest, you're probably thinking, wait, they were banned before? And if you're a host, maybe you're thinking the same thing. The article says, effective April 30th, Airbnb will prohibit all indoor cameras. And that includes common areas like hallways, living rooms, whatever. I'm in a few Airbnb host communities, and a lot of people, hosts, are actually upset about this. In this video, we're gonna go over the pros, the cons, and what my opinion is, and if you are a host, what you can do to adjust, and if you're a guest, what you can expect. So effective April 30th, as I mentioned, there will be no more cameras inside. Now they will still allow outdoor cameras, which is super important, especially to me, where I've had a lot of incidents at my house. If you follow my channel, you kind of know, and I need like outdoor cameras to see what's going on. So I think that's super important. Hopefully those don't get banned in the future, but indoor cameras are no more. And in my opinion, there's two main reasons for this. The first reason is Airbnb has a huge party problem. Luckily for me, I haven't had an issue with this, but I see this happen like every day. Somebody's saying that they had a party, a guest had a party, and it's an issue because you're actually not supposed to have parties. You're actually just supposed to have however many guests come, but sometimes it's hard to control. And the second issue is Airbnb has a huge problem with the quality of hosts and the quality of guests. I actually made a video about this a few months ago. I stayed in an Airbnb like as a guest, and it was horrible. Like the house wasn't clean, it was terrible. And then I've had, I have my Airbnb, and I've had guests stay in my house that were just like horrible people. And it's just like there's an issue with the quality of hosts where a lot of hosts are just going to IKEA, getting the bare minimum, throwing an ugly couch, some mattresses, and calling it an Airbnb with no vibe to the house. And then guests going to houses, even if they're cheaper houses, expecting like a 5-star hotel and getting mad about small things, or not respecting the house. So that's the main issue that I've seen with short-term rentals, is like the quality of hosts. It just sucks now. Like there's corporate hosts that they don't care at all, and the quality of guests, where just guests have high expectations or don't really care about your property. And there's also a lot of safety issues. I haven't had any major safety issues at my house. I've had a couple fights at my house. One time, I never spoke about this, but one time I had this is like a crazy story. I had a guest come stay in my house with her boyfriend, who I guess is her new boyfriend, and they a few days, and the first night was fine. Then the second night, I see there's an ambulance in front of my house, and I'm like, what happened? So it was like 10 p.m, ambulance in front of my house, like a bunch of police cars, and I rewatched the camera, and what happened was the ex-boyfriend, like the boyfriend before the new boyfriend, came and found where she was, which was my house, and actually broke down my door and was threatening her and crazy stuff. And there was a little bit of red stuff on the floor. I don't want to say what it's called, but yeah, it was a pretty crazy incident that happened. And yeah, that was really the only safety issue I had. But there is safety issues that could be prevalent in an Airbnb, because you don't know, as a guest, you don't know what happened at this house before. As a host, whatever. I've never had any issues prior, other than that one event. But damage is a problem. So I actually, going back to the story, my door was broken, one of my windows was broken. I had, stuff to clean up, so it wasn't fun. There's dents in my wall from them throwing stuff. So that happens. It happens, and it's super annoying. So Airbnb is trying to show guests that they have more privacy, they have more protection, they have better safety from creepy hosts or safety issues that could happen, especially with cameras. So what is the good of this? Well, I think the best good of this is it gets rid of creepy hosts, ideally completely. I've seen so many stories online. I was actually browsing Reddit and stuff a little bit, just looking up stories, and there's so many crazy stories with creepy hosts with cameras and stuff. I found this one article, and basically the guest booked a studio, and then right before his booking found out that the studio had a camera and inside the house, and it's a studio, so the camera was at the bed, and the host wouldn't let him refund it, and Airbnb wouldn't refund it unless the host approved it. So it looks like he tried to cancel it and they didn't accept it. There was a whole story with it. It was a big thing when it happened. But yeah, no, that's crazy to me. That shouldn't be allowed, cameras inside the house, especially in a studio. Now, also the good is privacy. As a guest, you're having privacy. I would never want to stay in an Airbnb or a hotel where there's a camera in my house. Like, bro, what? If the house has a camera in it, like inside, I think that's a huge red flag. I would leave immediately, or I would just unplug it. Okay, but there's one case scenario where I think it does make sense to have a camera. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And how it works right now, if you aren't aware with how cameras work inside Airbnbs, is they are allowed inside the house, but technically the host has to disclose it. Now, sometimes as a guest, you're just booking, you're not really looking at it, you're just, pictures look good, book it. I don't have to think about it anymore. I'm busy at work. So you're not looking at all the disclosures, or sometimes you just assume that there's no cameras inside houses. That's just like the logical thing to do. So that's when people get caught off guard. I've also looked up and saw multiple, Reddits and like Twitter X's, people saying that they found hidden cameras. And there's actually an article recently where there was like a hidden camera and like an outlet in the bathroom, which is insane, and that's a huge problem. And you should report that host to the police and to Airbnb if that's like a thing, because that's terrible, especially if it involves kids. Like, that's really bad. So the good is hopefully that's not an issue anymore. Now the bad, and why a lot of hosts are upset. This is really, really bad to people that have one of two things. The first thing is that they have a shared space where they actually rent out each bedroom instead of renting out the whole house. And when you rent out each bedroom, you're not really treating the living room and the kitchen like it's your own. It's kind of like a common area. So in that case, I think it makes sense to have a camera where you want to see, did this person get in their room? Like, was there a fight in the living room? Because you have all these different characters in the house, especially if you have multiple bedrooms. So I think it does make sense to have cameras in these shared spaces. Obviously, there was like loopholes and stuff where people are putting them in not shared spaces, but for shared spaces, and I think it's way more acceptable. Now, this won't be allowed anymore because it's still inside the house. So this really impacts shared space, people, shared space hosts and owners. I think as long as you mention it to the guest, it should be allowed, like a message and like loud at the top, but it's just not going to be allowed anymore. And what Airbnb wants to do is, instead of having like little rule exceptions, they're just going to blanket the whole thing and just say no cameras. And as a host, you just got to adapt. The second person that gets affected is the person that originally was what Airbnb was designed for. If you remember, originally Airbnb was designed for renting out bedrooms on the side, not renting out houses like it is now, but somebody that lives in a house and Airbnb's their second bedroom or third bedroom or multiple bedrooms. And I think if I'm a woman especially, like, I want cameras in my house to see, one, to protect me and see what's going on, because I don't know who's coming to this house. Like, obviously you could get a little overlay on their like profile, but like you don't know because that doesn't really tell you anything. So I think that character person gets affected a lot as well, because now it's their own protection too, and they won't be allowed to have cameras inside the house. Now, the main person that gets affected in the bad, the person that probably hates this rule the most, is creeps, and like creepy people, where now they had cameras and they can't have cameras. So I think that's a great rule to get rid of those people. We don't want those people hosting. I think they just bring down the whole entire industry. So that's great. Now, it did mention that outside cameras would be okay, which I think is good. As I mentioned earlier, hopefully that stays. We don't want that to get rid of, because I want to see what's going on, especially from like a party perspective. I can see like how many cars are in front of my house. I don't invade on the guest privacy, but outside cameras need to stay. So as of right now, they are, which is good. Now, my opinion on this is, whenever I stay in Airbnb, I've stayed in multiple Airbnbs over, years now, is I always check the house for cameras. Even before this rule, like I was always like kind of like scared about that. I always check the house for cameras. There's like a meme on like online where like people were like, the first thing you do in an Airbnb, and then it's like them doing like the most random thing. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. But like, I think those are like super relatable, because I always like low-key look. I'm like, all right, like, you know, I don't see anything. You feel me? So yeah, I think it makes sense totally. And as a host, I would never think about putting a camera inside my house. Even a shared space, I don't think I would do it, but it makes sense. I can understand why people are doing it. Now, the one thing that I'm curious about how it will get affected in this law and in the future, I didn't really see this being spoken about, was there's like little devices that you can put in your house that tracks sound. And it's not something where you're like listening to the guests' conversations, but it's like tracking like the sound levels and it reports it back. So I recently stayed at an Airbnb a few months ago. Not the one I mentioned that had the bad host, like a different one. And they're like, if the sound level gets too high in the backyard, then, you know, you guys will be kicked out. And at one point we were a little too loud, you know, just chilling in the backyard, and like they sent like a notification out. So like that's makes sense, I think, you know, to prevent partying. And I think those should be okay, especially inside the house. I think they should be okay. But something to kind of keep an eye on is like as those develop and progress, as long as the host can't listen to those conversations just for monitoring like sound levels, I don't see an issue with that. Now, just a recap, this is a battle between hotels and Airbnb, where hotels, this isn't an issue, and Airbnb, this was an issue, so they're kind of battling it out. Now, one thing that I do think is interesting is on Vrbo, this has actually been banned since 2022, so 2 years now. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're deciding who to book with, is this has been banned in Vrbo for a little bit now. And just like my going out advice is, if you are a guest, trust but verify. It's my favorite quote. Trust the host, but verify the host. Verify that there's no cameras. Even with this law, even before this law, verify there's no cameras in the house. Verify you have your privacy. And as a host, don't be a creep. Don't put cameras in your house. It's weird. And do more due diligence on your guests before they book with you to make sure that they're not going to throw parties and they've had reviews and other things like that. But let me know your thoughts. Do you think this is a good change? Do you think Airbnb should have done this sooner? Do you think this is going to affect people with like shared spaces in a negative way? As a guest, are you more excited to stay at Airbnbs, or do you feel the same? I'm curious what you think. Like, subscribe, and yeah, thanks for watching.